Our film begins with Sophie and James, a newlywed couple who are very happy and comfortable in their lives together. They move to live in a new apartment and remove the furniture together. He gets a call from his family telling him that his father died, so Pure James owned all his father's property and became the director of management of a huge state company. And it stays clean all the time in the house. She doesn't do anything because all the servants do it, but with time she feels bored, and this rich life turns into a life she is not comfortable with. Their rights are complete, and then James knows who netted his wife, and I did, and he is upset with what happened and tells her that the palace is too huge on the net alone to work in it, and that they must appoint servants. But in the last discussion does what his wife wants and completes their wish together and sleep, and one day James is working, and in the middle of a meeting with managers in the company calls his wife and remains I want his help in running the lawnmower in the garden, and at night James goes and runs the machine and fixes the breakdown in it. And the situation is like this every day prefers to net James from work because she does not know how to run the palace herself and prefers to ask him how to behave and want to help him her husband. And one day he goes to a man named Julian. He makes and sells special artificial intelligence robots that can be used in cleaning tasks and household chores, and initially offers them a robot in the form of a beautiful girl. But the Net does not agree to the choice because she wants to be the only woman living in the palace in the form of a handsome young man, and his name is Heener. And then every day Hanari stays doing cleaning, cooking, washing, and all the housework and does anything his friends go through. And in the beginning everything is going well without a problem. But one day Hanari is in a clean room and sees by chance she changes her clothes exists, and when you take care of it you let it come out outside, and calls Sophie James to complain about what happened to him and Henry, and one day the relationship between the couple is tense, and there are problems between them, and Sophie always feels lonely because James is always busy in his work every day, and with time begins to arbitrarily compensate for the loss of James, the only one in the palace, and as the days go by Net feelings move towards Henry and reads from him at once that he writes a book that talks about human feelings and sensations, and this is because he can absorb this with his artificial intelligence and knows how to deal with him like humans exactly, and actually begins to develop his artificial intelligence has and becomes all a situation he is exposed to has an impact on the formation of his personality and feelings. And one day at night, she hears Annette, and she is sleeping in the room with her husband, a voice coming from outside. What do you like? And find here Rhinum in the garden, and is depressed and says he dreams and wishes to be a normal human being, and Net to Julian and ask about the strange behavior that Heiner did yesterday. Julian tells them that it may have happened because they let Henry's feelings and sensations develop exaggeratedly and therefore may think of himself as a human being and deal with them as one of them. All this, and in this case the relationship between them, is on near the end, and once after work James returns home, and Bella, Net letter was written, and this letter is written long ago from the days when they were moving to the first house, and shows how much she loved James and draws for her life with him in Beirut James' room, and lights candles, and makes a romantic atmosphere, and enters it. He wants to get into a relationship with her, but she refuses and tells him that she doesn't feel comfortable with something like this with him now. And at night Hanari talks to Sophie and tells her that he has feelings for her and loves her, and Hannah feels that he was designed to do everything Sophie wants and that he can enter into a relationship with her as part of his service to her. Fire while doing a massage session, and the next day, when Jamesy goes to work, she goes Net and opens the door of her room, and she changes so Hannah sees her, and then she goes to meet him to make sure he saw her. And one day James comes back from work and sees his wife sitting with Henry next to the swimming pool solve for Heiner's subject, but Julian says he thinks that Heiner's behavior is linked to what his friend or wife wants, and goes to James and passes Heiner that he does not deal with Sophie again, and becomes here sad and depressed, and says to Sophie on James said to him he liked to discuss with James because of what he did and reconcile, and the next day he calls James on his wife Net from his office and wants to fix the relationship between him and her, and be Net in the palace from behind James to meet Henry and Henari massage session, and kisses her and says I love you in the same way that James says with everything at home. James gets angry when he knows what's happening behind him and goes to hit Henry and disconnects the power circuit from his charge, and the next morning James and Sophie are waiting for Julian to get home to take Henry, but Julian is late for them, and James goes to work and leaves Sophie waiting alone. I'm surprised he knows how to move without charge and goes and sees Ned and takes care of the words that got on the face of Henri. So Ned becomes fanatical and goes to James in his office to upset him for what he did, and Julian arrived, but Ned ignores his nervousness and then looks at Henry himself in the mirror on it and passes that he enters his room, but Henry doesn't listen to him and takes here Rala from that Julian was lying to them all this time and goes to James's office, and there they both regret what they did, and James tells her that he got all his nervousness on Henry, and at the end of the dialogue between them they forgive each other for what they did. They go home together, and when they return home they find Henry alone in the garden, but Henry tells them that he knew that all his life he was a human being, and that he was a slave. They are brainwashed into being robots, and B. Julian is the one. Henry was adopted when he was young, and he was physically abused by his mother, and she threw him out of the house as a child, and then James and Sophie arrive and stay with them. Two officers to arrest Julian in their house. Henry intervenes and jumps on him, and takes the gun, and beats him until he dies without mercy, and Henry feels betrayed by Julian, who raised him, and feels betrayed when he was appreciated by Sophie, and he worked for her. And her husband was with her. He dies and takes his last breath, and 5 years later appears Sophie and James sitting in the garden, and they have a son named Henry after the deceased, and they are determined to tell their son the story of his name one day when he grows up.